Welcome, everyone, to today's webinar, Empowering Voices. My name is Rena Drake, and I am a director on the UNH Alumni Association Board of Directors. We're a board of dedicated alumni volunteers working to foster connections among alumni, students, and the community to strengthen the UNH network. I'm here today asking you, my fellow Wildcats, to sign up as 603 Challenge Champions to help us build our UNH community and support our students' success. I think we can all agree that our years at UNH were some of the best of our lives. It's where we began our vocational and social journeys, to say the least. Being a 603 champion literally requires about 2 minutes of your time. Just reach out to 5 of your alumni friends during the 603 Challenge in April and ask them to make a gift in any amount to their favorite area at UNH. And I do mean any amount, as little as $5, the price of a cup of coffee. Once you sign up, you'll receive a cool pair of UNH socks in the mail and a clear and simple message to share with your 5 friends. Once that message is sent, you'll be entered in a raffle to win a beautiful wildcat statue you should see pictured here. Information regarding this participation will be forthcoming to you via email. Thank you again for your attention and commitment to our wonderful community. Now I'm going to turn it over to Jerry Ann.
Jerry Ann, please unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. Happy Black History Month, everybody, and welcome to this conversation that we're going to be having, a critical conversation entitled Empowering Voices, the Evolution of Race, Gender, and Power in Our Societies. This is a well-needed dialogue at this time, given the environment that we're in. And we're talking about 3 real powerful forces, race, gender, and power, that intersect in very profound ways. As we navigate this moment in history where longstanding structures are being challenged and reimagined, our discussion today will explore how these dynamics continue to evolve, who holds the power, who is changing, who is resisting, and what the future may hold for more justice and for a more just and equitable society. I'm really honored to be hosting this event and being with these scholars and thought-provoking folks that will add to our conversation. And I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. And I'll start off with Casey.
Thank you so much, Jerry Ann. Hello, everyone. My name is Professor Casey Golomsky. I'm the chair of the Anthropology Department at UNH, the program coordinator of our Africana Studies minor, a member of Women's and Gender Studies faculty, and a board member of the Seacoast African American Cultural Center in Portsmouth.
Thank you, Professor Casey. And then we have Tanisha Johnson.
Hi, everyone. I am Tanisha Johnson. I am the Director of Family Services at Community Action Partnership. I am also the co-founder of Black Lives Matter New Hampshire and Seacoast, and an adjunct professor for Women and Gender Studies here at UNH. And also I am on the board of Black Heritage Trail as the Vice President.
Thank you, Ms. Tanisha. I see you're very busy. And next up, we have a Wildcat who I really had the pleasure of knowing for a long time and being one of our mentees, Blair Roulette.
Thank you, Jerry Ann, and good afternoon, everyone. Blair Roulette, I graduated from UNH in 2005 with a dual degree in psychology and justice studies. And since then, for the last 2 decades, I guess now it would be, I've been working for Stratford County as the director of the Community Mental Health Supervision Programs.
Thank you so much, Blair. And rounding up our panel is Kai Uchida. Welcome, Kai.
Thank you, Jerry Ann. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kai Uchida. I'm the University Archivist for Millen Special Collections and Archives and Assistant Professor with Library Faculty. So happy to be here today. Nice to see everyone.
Thank you all. And without much ado, we're really going to jump into this so we make the best use of our time and get into a real deep conversation. I just want to let the audience know there's a Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. We encourage you to ask questions throughout the webinar. Somebody will be monitoring your questions and passing them on to me, but just keep the questions coming. What we do want to have is a vibrant dialogue between all of us, and an opportunity for us to really engage in brave conversations around this topic. So without much ado, I'll start off and ask Professor Casey our first question. How do recent events impact our understanding of race, gender, and power? And how is this influenced by technology?
Thank you, Jerry-Ann. I want to be very real and acknowledge that people are profoundly impacted by what seems like a deluge of executive orders and federal mandates that sometimes align with state level policy making and have really disrupted the work life kind of like intersection for many people in the university setting, which I know best, but as well as the community organizing groups that I'm part of, like the African American Cultural Center in Portsmouth. And I don't think, I want to be honest that it has been very difficult. The impact has been, I think, immeasurable, emotional, existential, and leaving people profoundly uncertain. And I think I think we can be strong in focusing on, the topic or the area of information and concern that affects oneself most profoundly, and not try to, I think, take it all in at the same time. I think evolutionarily, human beings, we are not evolved or primed to behold the flood of information that we do receive every day in social media and the news. 20 years ago, we were reading a single newspaper, every day, and that's how we digest information. And now we live in kind of an information vortex that is highly structured by algorithmic siloing. This is something that Ruha Benjamin, an African American studies at Princeton, has written extensively about, and others in STS feminist studies. But it is okay to feel unwell because there is a lot going on. I think, I can give examples of this impact about, how our understandings of race, gender, and power are changing at the federal level, at the local level, at the international level. And it's really about how our understandings of these topics are being revised and or erased in real time. At the federal level, for example, in terms of how our understanding of race, gender, and power is impacted, the FDA and the CDC provide the public with health statistics, population demographic statistics related to health. There were executive orders to remove information from these websites. Information that was recently removed from the CDC website, for example, includes statistics on HIV for trans people, health disparities data for LGBT youth, information about HIV among Latino and Hispanic populations, women, and matrices around the intersection of age, race, and ethnicity, and the foregrounding of a stance by the executive office of the presidency that there is one female sex, one male sex, and this binaristically conflates with male gender and female gender, erasing kind of the trans experience and years of people who live as trans and intersex people. This has been restrained. A temporary restraining order has been placed to restore this information on Valentine's Day this week by a U.S. federal judge. So if this goes through, this information will be restored to public view. Our understanding, will remain. It will not be erased. At the local level, I think many people in New Hampshire are aware of the HB 61 divisive concepts law that was put in place in, the early 2020s that put a kind of very prescriptive, measured kind of speech on K through 12 school teachers in our state that also left very vague kind of space for how educators should talk about, or whether or not they could even talk about, implicit bias in the present as it affects interracial relations and racism today. There were guidelines set by the New Hampshire Attorney General's office. The kind of a Democratic contingent of the state legislature wants to have a legislative service request to repeal HB 61 following a federal judge deeming it unconstitutional. The New Hampshire Attorney General wants to appeal this repeal. So we see it at the local level. And there is an entire storyline about how Elon Musk, who is kind of in concert with the executive branch at this point in time in our presidential administration, a white South African man, has, I believe, influenced the president and our new Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, to make disparaging comments against South Africans. And this is kind of embodied in the fact that our Secretary of State will not attend the G20 summit in South Africa in the coming months. Revising, I think, the given, received, and lived history of anti-racist struggle in that country that mirrors our own. And to maybe pivot and sum up, to turn it back to, I think, a lot of people in the room who are our students. Coming up at UNH is the Audre Lorde Summit at the Albany Beauregard Center. And Audre Lorde, well, Black feminist, American icon, long fought as part of the anti-apartheid, anti-racist movement for South African freedom. And she wrote a lot about South Africa in her poetry, actually. And I want to read an excerpt from a poem that she wrote about 40 years ago called The Evening News. I am kneading my bread, Winnie Mandela, while children who sing in the streets of Soweto, a city in South Africa, are jailed for inciting to riot. The moon in Soweto is mad. Winnie Mandela, I am feeling your face with pain of my crippled fingers. Our children are escaping their births in the streets of Soweto and Brooklyn. What does it mean, our wars being fought by our children? Winnie Mandela, our names are like olives, salt, sand, the opal, amber, obsidian that hide their shape well. We have never touched shaven foreheads together, yet how many of our sisters' and daughters' bones whiten in secret, whose names we have not yet spoken, whose names we have never spoken. I have never heard their names spoken. I hope this forum, maybe in the spirit of Audre Lorde and those who are engaging in what I call lawfare or judicialization to stop the erasure of this information, I hope collectively that can empower voices as we hope to do in this session. So thank you, Jerry Ann, for allowing me the time to speak.
Thank you, Professor Casey, and thanks for laying out the issues that are in front of us around the work that we're doing in our communities right now. I want to ask you, Kai, has there been a time like this before? What is the difference now compared to historically in terms of the conversations we're having around race, gender, and power? And then how has the proliferation of social media affected us being able to, I don't know if I want to say divide, but there's a clear divide in our country. And how does those things come together to create the environment, the kind of storm that we're in around diversity and sense of belonging and DEI work,
Yeah,
and the
thank you, Jerry
erasure
Ann.
of it?
Thank you, Professor Golomsky. I'm going to kind of reaffirm some of Professor Golomsky's points here. As an archivist, one of the things that feels really markedly different and exceptional is the overall information and media environment where these conversations about these intrinsically connected topics occur. And as he said, it speaks to our new moment in our information age. And these conversations have reached this incredible kind of point of hypersaturation. And that's coupled with this diffuseness in every part of our lives through so many different prisms of access, like smartphones, tablets, devices, through a myriad of platforms and outlets. And there are more forums than ever to discuss these conversations and more points of contacts to kind of bear witness to them. And then it can make them at times feel overwhelming, deafening, or even without context. But there have always been, as we can look at the historical record in our collections and more widely, passionate debates about race, gender, and power. And you can see them played out in major places like our national news, but also in more immediate environments like our campus, where they can be found in our records of faculty, students, staff, and administration. The New Hampshire Student Newspaper, which is something that we teach a lot with in University Archives, is one particular outlet where I can think of really salient examples of these lively debates. And that will continue to be an important venue as we re-engage with these very fundamental conversations around belonging. But there are also some things that I would also like to highlight that echo the past and stay the same. And there's always been this explicit acknowledgement that the interpretation of history is an inherently political issue. And attempts to control that interpretation are replete with the same strategies that we've seen throughout the recent past. One such strategy that we've seen is the erasure or wholesale misconception of historical narratives to best suit any suite of ideological interests that the folks in power might have. And that we've seen that neglecting the study of history, of Black history, of ignoring difficult parts of our country's past with respect to race, with respect to gender, with respect to class, has been a very common tactic. And what also mirrors the past, though, in response to that, is the resilience, the advocacy, and the tireless work that's done by grassroots organizers, by activists, by scholars to combat that erasure. They provide momentum and the tools to ensure that the work of combating erasure and the rewriting of historical memory by the folks in power that would change it does not occur, and that we remain reflective on both the successes and the failures of the past. And as an archivist, I always want to prioritize preserving their work and the historical record at large, whether it's the work here on campus at the Black Student Union, leadership efforts to make UNH a more welcoming and inclusive campus, or any of the curricular history departments that research and study Black history and culture and life. Thanks, Jerry-Ann.
Hi, can you just give us some examples of what we might have seen on campus around the erasure of this history?
Yeah, I would say the fact that there is a set of programs that's directed to or departments and areas of study that are devoted to the study of Black history is not necessarily a given to begin with. And we have in our collections several records and conversations that reflect an effort to get an Africana Studies program up and running here and a Black Studies program that was up and running here that reflects some of the larger currents of curricular history at public universities in the United States that was going on during the late 60s. The strikes in some of the California state schools with the Third World Front and particularly come to mind. And you kind of see a particular, perhaps more conservative strand of folks pushing back against the need to interpret that history, to study it, to make it a serious line of intellectual inquiry. And that feels like a pretty apparent example to me.
Thank you, Kai. Casey, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I think I really like that Kai is stewarding this like you said, like intimate, like close history on UNH, maybe to bring in from the gender or sexuality angle. On the library archive website, there's a great overview of how kind of the political existence of gay and lesbian students at at the University of New Hampshire was itself a political struggle. In 1973, I'm reading from the library kind of website here. In 1973, a group of students came together to create the first gay student organization. The group was explicitly targeted by then governor of the state of New Hampshire, Meldrum Thompson, and William Loeb, the publisher of the Manchester Union Leader. Thompson threatened to replace board of trustee members at the university and withhold funding if the group was allowed to continue on campus. The students persisted in a series of dances and theater performances, distribution of LGBTQ literature, this distribution of like anthologies, storytelling. And ultimately, the ACLU was involved, and this really was determined that restrictions could not take place because this was a violation of gay students' First Amendment rights and their right to freedom. This is, really part of the landscape that, people in our community, at least at the university, foregrounding like the right to exist and express themselves. So I just wanted to pull that because that's also something that Kai and his colleagues have really nicely put out for the public to see also.
Thank you, Casey. Yeah.
Thank you, Casey. I'm going to turn this question over to Blair as a student who has lived through UNH's turbulent times and participated through the Office of Multicultural Student Affairs when it was named the Office of Multicultural Student Affairs. I want you to just give us a feel of what your lived experience at UNH and being in the greater community in terms of our topic around race, gender, and system. How did that affect you as a student, and how do you see that playing out in the larger world outside of the university?
Sure. Thank you, Jarian. So you'll have to indulge me a bit. I think I need to go backwards before I can get to the present. So I want to go back to 1963. In 1963, Coretta Scott King and Dr. King submitted an application to a private school in Atlanta, Georgia, for Martin Luther King III. And that school denied that application, citing in the letter that it was the first Negro to apply to the school, and they weren't interested in getting into any kind of problems with race or anything like that. Fast forward 30 years, I find myself at that same school. And interestingly enough, we were a low-income family. We didn't have a lot of money. We grew up very modestly, but my mother wanted better for my brothers and I. And so this is a really, really well-known private school in Atlanta. Currently, I just looked at it before this webinar. It's for this academic year, it's $37,000 a year to be a student there, and it's not a boarding school. So, so for us to go there, we couldn't afford that. And so my mother applied on a whim and said, I want my children to have better for themselves. And part of that application process was you walking in and actually doing a sit-down interview. And when we walked in, the admissions lady was kind of shocked because my mother's white, but her 3 children are not. And so they're talking to us, and my brothers and I are all kind of BC students. We're not really great at academics, but very active in sports and band, other extracurriculars. And somehow all 3 of us got full academic scholarships to this school. It's pretty unspoken that there was a lot of reconciliation that they were doing. They were trying to get more diversity within the school, and so there was a lot of low-income Black and brown kids that went there, and they went on also on academic scholarships. And so this is just an example of, for us, having an opportunity to access an education that we otherwise wouldn't have. At the time, we were in public schools in Atlanta, which you're probably talking, it's student to teacher ratio, maybe 30, 40. This school has 8 students to 1 teacher. It's a college prep school. We all got into college. My brothers and I, we all graduated from college. So it was an opportunity that we had that we wouldn't have otherwise had access to, like I said. And with the conversation currently around DEI and opportunities like that, I think that's important to recognize. Fast forward, I guess about 9 years from there, I find myself getting a phone call from Dr. Roger Beatty, and I met him along with Jerry Ann and Sean McGee, and I found myself at UNH, a part of the Connect program. And I was a mentee my freshman year, and I got to meet other kids that looked like me in a place that was very unfamiliar to me, and it gave me access to the school. I think, was it Jerry? And we got there a week before the rest of the students, and we got to acclimate, and it was really great to feel welcome in a place that I was so unsure of. I was also a resident on the Common Purposes floor in Divine. And so Common Purposes is a diversity floor where you get to, again, hang out with kids that look like you, think like you, maybe have common experiences as you. And I think that really set me off on the right foot at UNH. My sophomore year, I became a mentor for the Connect program, and I met my best friend even to this day. We're still best friends, and she was contacted. She grew up in Harlem, and similar, she would have never thought to go to UNH. It wasn't even on her radar. And she just, if you watch the Super Bowl, she had a huge hand in creating that whole event. She's going to be doing the All-Star event for the NBA coming up, and she's seen everything from Brazil to the Great Wall of China, and she's had all these incredible experiences in her life that who knows if she would have had those otherwise. And so, I did a magazine article recently for UNH alumni, and I said I never had a bad experience at UNH, and that's partially true. I think I never allowed myself to have a bad experience. I was, as Jerian said, super involved in OMSA, the BSU Alliance. I helped create the Breakout conference in 2004, I think it was. We had RuPaul come to campus. There wasn't a huge turnout, but we were pretty proud of it. Like I said, I was on Common Purposes. I ended up spending a couple of years at the Ways Meet Center as a resident there. So I really, really involved myself in places and spaces with people who I wouldn't allow to provide me with a negative experience at UNH. And then, fast forward to my career now, I think that's where I start to get into less about maybe my race and more about my gender. I identify as a cisgender female. I present more masculinely, and I know that that helps me kind of navigate the world. I think it's frequently told that Black women have to work 10 times as hard to get half the recognition. And I would up that to 20, because as a masculine presenting Black woman, I have to work 10 times as hard. And I think that feminine Black women probably have it harder. I found that masculinity affords you a little bit more respect just inherently. I think I hate to use this word in a professional setting, but the difference between being a bitch and being a go-getter is gender. I can get away with a little bit more than possibly some of my feminine colleagues, and men that I work with can get away with even more. And so in a field like I work in, which is essentially law enforcement, it's a male-dominated field, or it historically at least has been. And I think being more masculine presented has, I'll admit, afforded me a little bit easier of a path to get to where I am, being the director of these programs. Certainly not discrediting my hard work, but I see that female colleagues who are feminine presenting do tend to have a more difficult time being more forthcoming and being really confident in themselves. And so, race, gender, and power, how those all kind of intersect. I just, through my lived experiences, I've witnessed those things, and I've seen how I've had advantages and disadvantages throughout my life. And I guess the last thing I would probably leave is I don't know if anyone's familiar with Kimberly Latrice Jones. She's an activist and author, and I know one of the things we'll talk about is how technology kind of impacts this discussion. I found her on Instagram, and she talks about playing a game of Monopoly for 400 years and being told that, and I want her to get all the credit for this because it's beautiful, and I'm not nearly as eloquent, but I'll try not to butcher it too much. Playing for 400 years, and every time you played, all of the money and wealth that you made went towards your opponent, and they got to keep all that, and you got nothing. And then for 50 years, you get to play, and they say, all right, fine, we'll play fair. You get to keep what you keep. But then they don't like how much you're gaining. They don't like how much property you have, how much money you have. And so they burn it all down. And that's Tulsa, and that's Rosewood. And then, you're starting over and finally say, all right, it's fair now. Why is it taking you so long to catch up? Just catch up. And the only way to catch up is by sharing the wealth, is by having access to things that they have had access to for 450 years. And so when I talk about, my lived experience and coming from a place where it denied Martin Luther King Jr.'s son access to education, and then me being able to access that education, my brothers being able to access that, my best friend being able to access that, and being able to have success and see success, and still acknowledging that we have to work a little bit harder in general. I just think the conversation around DEI and suggesting that we're where we need to be and everyone's on equal playing field and there is equity is just ridiculous if you talk to just an average person like me and get kind of a background of what I've experienced in just one lifetime, let alone my father who's still living at 81 and the things that he experienced in his lifetime. I think it's just a matter of conversations like these. So I really appreciate the opportunity to speak on it.
Thank you so much, Blair. I just have to you talked a little bit and you brought up some plans and that UNH had, and just made me think about the Connect program, Common Purpose, Ways Meet, all these ways in which students who just got access to this education were allowed to connect with each other and create an environment where they may succeed. What did we lose by losing these programs on campus?
I agree. I would have never known about UNH. My friend would have never known. So many people that I went to school with would have never known that UNH was even a possibility without the Connect program. And not to say that, I'm a genius or, I hold value. And, without my access to UNH and my education there, there would have been someone in my position now, but it wouldn't have been me. And I know my worth, and I know that I'm a value to my employer. And then on campus, even if I accessed UNH without the Connect program, I would not have felt welcome. I would not have felt like I belonged. I wouldn't have found a home in OMSA where I could just go and chat with you and, play on the computer, whatever. It would not, I probably wouldn't have stayed after my freshman year if I didn't have access to those programs.
Thank you. That was what I said. Just access alone doesn't cover everything. It's a good start, but we do have to have these other things in order to maintain a structure and to grow beyond that. Thank you so much, Blair.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Tanisha, we've talked a little bit about the intersectionalities of race, power, and gender. How does these intersectionality plays into the conversation around your work and your community advocacy?
Just to go back a little bit to the question I think we asked Kai, from a historical lens until now, we know that, back in the civil rights movement, or even before, when we talk about women's rights and all of that, the suffrage movement, the discussions around race and gender were often separate, right? They focused on either gender equality or racial equality, and power was really discussed in terms of that direct oppression, that visible oppression, versus we're talking about intersectionality, which I'll get into, but we're also talking about that structural understanding of power, the dynamics of systems, and how economies and policies and media really help that. And I also will say that in the past, or in historical concepts, these conversations were not just had with anyone, right? It was under academia. It was under the civil rights activists who had the groups around them. You didn't have what we have now, technology, where anybody can be considered an activist, where anyone can go on their TikTok or their Instagram and make a video and talk out and start a movement. So there's some huge differences of where we were to where we are now. One thing that's not different is the violence. We went from being protests, being sprayed water at, to now we're just being killed in the streets, right? Police are killing, all the things that are happening. The violence is still there. But in terms of intersectionality, which was a term coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, it really helps us understand how multiple forms of oppression, like racism, sexism, classism, ableism, how they overlap and shape our individual experiences. We understand the multiple layers of oppression. A Black woman's experience with sexism is going to be different from a white woman, just due to racial bias. Blair, you had mentioned how what it means to be a bitch, right? Or a go-getter. And it's not even just gender, it's also race, because what I can say versus what someone else can say, and that consequence that comes afterwards is completely different. A transgender person of color faces different challenges than a white transgender person. So all those things that we need to start talking about, or we have been talking about, it's really important for intersectionality. But with community work, it really helps our organizing, right? We're bringing a wide range of folks together rather than that single view approach, right? We're not just focusing only on gender without considering how class plays into it, without considering how race plays into it. I think about the Say Her Name campaign that really highlighted Black women being killed by police, but it filled in that gap, where we were talking about just overall racial justice movement. Say Her Name brought in the fact that Black women were also being killed. So it brought us that connection to that movement. Our grassroots organizations, we use that intersectional framework to help design those policies that consider the needs of all the different groups, reproductive justice movements that are also addressing racial disparities in healthcare. That is important to bring those two together. We can't just fight for one thing without bringing the other dynamics into play. When we talk about fighting for laws and policy reform, we have to make sure we're considering race and disability and immigration status when we're talking about gender discrimination laws. Health policies have to acknowledge again how race and economic factors affect our access to appropriate care. So intersectionality is so important to the work that we do, because where the movement stopped in the 60s, 70s, and I would say it didn't really stop, but where that visible stop occurred was because they were so single viewed. Now we have to be multi-viewed, because that collective power that we all bring together is crucial to change.
Thank you, Tanisha. There's something that you just said, and I just want to expound on it a little bit more. You said that nowadays, with the technology that we have, anybody can get on TikTok and share their views, their opinions, whether it be truth-telling or opinions. How does that affect this work of intersectionality when we're getting different opinions, different biases, different viewpoints, and not necessarily truth-telling?
The misinformation, because everybody can go on technology, because the speed is so quickly and you get so connected, that is part of the problem, right? There is just so many people saying things that are not backed by data, that are not backed by facts. And some are not even backed by real life experience, right? Some people are just sharing other stories, and we know what happens when we play the telephone game. But when we begin to use technology appropriately, when we start to understand the biases in technology, how the biases is in AI, the same how we need to build our systems of discrimination and fight against those, we have to do that in technology as well. AI and everything that's happening, they're recognizing certain types of faces. They're recognizing certain types of language and text that we use. It's a form of non-inclusion as well. And so we need to figure out, when we follow people, when we're signing up for things, when we're advocating for tech everywhere, is it the appropriate space? Is it the appropriate language? Is this person really advocating for me? Are they being intersectional? And because sometimes they're not, and so we need to figure out, it was so easy back in the day, and I say back in the day like it was so long ago, but it was so easy to know, yes, I stand with Malcolm X. Yes, I stand with, Angie Davis. Yes, I stand with all these folks. Now there's so many people who are out there doing this work that you have to figure out who you're following behind before you just, light the torch for them.
So, Tanisha, are you advocating personal responsibility in the way that we get our news?
Yes, I am. Like, can we stop for a second? Like, I get it's a fast world. It is fast out here, right? But can you pause for a minute and not just share that TikTok from this random white girl who said, fight for the lives? Can we make sure the stories that we're sharing are real? Can we make sure, and also stop sharing the videos of the violence that are happening to our people? All we are doing is reinforcing the trauma that is being experienced by our Black men and women. Stop giving it the time and all of that. We have our personal responsibility to educate ourselves. And also, white people have their personal responsibility to educate themselves as well. Don't just listen to what's out there, educate yourselves. And it doesn't mean just read a book. It means do the actual work. Sorry, I'm gonna get off my soapbox. I'm done.
Thank you, Tanisha. I know we talked a little bit before this about the terms DE&I, diversity, inclusion, and why is there such a fear? Why is there such a backlash around the term itself and not and what it actually means? And I'm opening this up to the floor to anybody who wants to answer. There's so much, there's misinformation about what it means, where it comes from. There's fear, and there's like a total shutting down and wiping out of all the efforts that had been put forward before. Why is that?
I can start. DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's a challenge to traditional structures. It disrupts that long-standing power dynamics in workplaces and education and politics. Those who have historically benefited from existing systems, now they're feeling threatened. You have businesses who are trying to change your dynamics, and that's leading to fears of job security and influence. You have cultural anxieties that are changing norms around gender and race and identity. And some folks that's unsettling for, and it really expands our educational thinking, our critical thinking. What we have historically known to maintain power, DEI really interrupts that. It tries to redirect that course. And I will just say, a less informed public is easier to manipulate. So making that attack on education and anything else is a really good strategic move, because it will weaken our engagement. It will weaken our democracy. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Tanisha. Anyone else wants to jump in on that?
I will, Jerry. I think just to go back to Kimberly Latrice Jones real quick, the monopoly analogy, one of the things she said was that when DEI is thrown back in your face, it's a form of psychological warfare, because you haven't had an opportunity at this piece of the pie. And again, power is a pie. Not everyone can have a slice. And if for 450 years you haven't been given an opportunity at the piece of the pie, and all of a sudden you are, now they want to throw it back and say, well, you can't catch up. So now you want DEI, now you want special treatment. And it's a form of psychological warfare to kind of throw it back at you. So I found that interesting too, and just that.
Thanks, Blair. Thank you. Kai or Casey?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I guess just some trailing thoughts on Tanisha and Blair's really good insights. I mean, really, I think the contemporary statistic is that fewer than 39% of Americans have a bachelor's degree. So there is really a skew towards people with a high school education, and new concepts can come into being with like a gap of interpretation. Like, going back to technology, we can see all of the activity we do on our phones, but yeah, we might not have like a cultural script to know how to interpret all the data that might come from a Fitbit. Like, we're trying to make sense of this, and those in power who find themselves in power in media, or by knowing how to advantageously manipulate algorithms, can take hold of that interpretation. And DEI, which should also maybe sometimes include A for accessibility. At UNH, the Faculty Senate passed the motion that students now should be required to have one course that is meeting learning outcomes, where a student engages in experiential or content learning around inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. And this is a very capacious category that includes issues of race, but also issues of veteran status, people who find themselves unemployed because maybe there is age discrimination in the workplace, people who live with different cognitive abilities or accessibility concerns like autism or ADHD. Those people can and do and will benefit from DEI or IDEA, but the entire concept has been alter racialized as something that is anti-white, and we are kind of seeing those in power make this interpretive swing as for DEI being an anti-white kind of phenomenon versus one that is capacious to include all people, bring them all to the table, and or just remake the table so we can all sit at it.
Thank you, Casey. Kai, anything you want to add?
I know everyone, the three folks here made such wonderful, wonderful thoughts relative to this particular topic, but I think one thing that Tanisha touched on that I just want to go back to one more time relative to these attacks in DEI and kind of just the deluge of content that about attacks on that particular prism of issues, and how we kind of interpret them relative to this rapid kind of paced information environment. Is just, she made a point about I don't know if the exact word was used, but it's just deceleration, just thinking about, you know, why someone is making that point, kind of appraising like why they have this particular political point of view, and whether you're going to call in and support them or kind of ally yourself with that particular perspective, and um, participating in this larger conversation. Yeah, I don't have anything else to add other than that, though. Really wonderful conversation.
Equity and inclusion are American values.
Thank you so much, Kai. I was actually trying to listen to, there was a video that Akeem Jeffries had put out. I'm not sure if anybody saw that. It was really great on what DEI is. And I just wanted to try to get the words clear of how he defined what DEI is, that they're really American values. And if we really looked at it and not mystify the words as what we kind of appropriate it to be, diversity, we say, America is built on the model of out of many one people, that is diversity. Our principle is that equal protection under the law, that's equity. And we are one nation, liberty and justice for all meaning inclusion. And I think if we can really go back to those real words of what DEI is, you know, we kind of demystify the kind of the way a certain group is trying to co-opt the words and erase all the work that had been done that allow people equity, inclusion, and diversity in what we say America country is. So thank you all for that. Appreciate it. One of the places where we see this divide is in higher education, right? Because an educated populace asks too many questions, right? So how do we protect our institutions, and how do we be part of those dialogues in the institutions so we can continue to be critical learning beings around these? I mean, the institution itself is a huge power structure, and our students seem to not have the power. Where is that balance in this journey?
Maybe I can respond with some initial thoughts. I think institutions are made of people also, and I think we are in a very wonderfully primed institution that is not only supported by rich federal grant structures, but really is a public service university. We are here to educate and serve the public, and that's ranging from, the histories of cooperative extension schools. Like, we are teaching citizens of New Hampshire how to do dairy farming, how to do agriculture, how to make the most of the land. And that, of course, is a complicated history with indigenous settlement that, we are aware of and make land claims to and do decolonial work towards. But active engagement by our faculty and staff, with offices like Michelle Holt Shannon, New Hampshire Listens, to speak to and be in conversation with people who are outside of the halls of academia or the ivory tower, however you want to kind of illustratively call it, is so crucial. And, in our department, for example, we do, in our forensics unit, we do trainings with the New Hampshire State Police, the Office of the Medical Examiner, to resurrect cold cases of people who have disproportionately died by violence for being trans, intersex, or of color. Talking to those in power in the community, educating people in local media, on maybe like Facebook outreach, where there is kind of an interesting environment of information circulating, but not only reaching our students in kind of the very wonderful kind of close classroom setting, but really doing the hard work of meeting those in the community that may not initially see eye to eye with you. That is really, I think, how, as an institution made of people, we can make an impact.
Well, thank you, Casey. I have a question in the chat I'll throw out, and hopefully we can. How is DEI being interpreted in New Hampshire today? Thank you, Sharon Tarleton, for that question. And how has this impacted your work? How is DEI interpreted in New Hampshire today? And how do you see it impacting the work that you do?
I think there's a mixture, right? I think we have those that are full-blown stick with DEI. We do it, we're standing by it, we are allies, we are staying with it in our organizations, and we're going to continue the policies and all the things. And then I think there are some that feel like it is how some feel about affirmative action. It is a way to give someone a leg up, right? Instead of the story of pull up by your bootstraps, right? And then we go, well, what if they didn't have bootstraps? So, and folks are like, that's not the point. Everyone should be working. Everyone should be doing this. So I think it depends on who you are and where you are. I think there are some of us, even as Black folks, that have not even felt benefits of DEI. I think a lot of times we have fought to be at the tables, and we finally get at these tables and we're like, oh, this table sucks. So there's like that avenue of it as well. There's also the conversation now about who actually benefited from DEI. There's data and stats showing now that's coming out that most of the folks that benefited from DEI were white women. And so to put all this fight into something that at the end of the day, we're still not even benefiting from, yet still feeling the most consequence from, is this irony, and the reason why we do have to come together and we do have to fight, but we do have to, like Jerian said, probably get back to those other words, right? So that, because it's been so misconstrued, we need to go back to the simpleness of for all and equal opportunities, and really, working on those barriers that we're all experiencing.
Thank you, Ms. Tanisha. For so long, Dee and I've come to this really narrow view that the only people who benefit from it are people of color. And the data is showing that that's just not true at all. So how do we reconcile the reality with the myth of what DEI is? I think, Kai, that there was a question. How did this historic victory combating this erasure come about?
I think,
was this huge backlash?
Yeah, I think at the curatorial level, the way that we think about collections, the way that we think about developing a community history of a school and a repository that is supposed to reflect a public institution that serves a public at large for the Granite State, means that we represent all of its constituent parts. We represent the entirety of the student experience, of the staff, students, of the faculty experience, and what students do with their time, their education at UNH beyond, and provide really concrete examples of what that kind of diverse spectrum of lived experience looks like, and show that it's not necessarily just like this kind of singular prescriptive group that is benefiting more than another in the way that we try to interpret those stories and those histories. And the way that I think that we do that is at the collection level in terms of like what we collect, what is a priority. So maybe instead of just focusing on the administrative history of the school, or just focusing on the kind of curricular activities at a high level at the college, for example, in the archives, we've started an oral history program to highlight the perspectives of union advocacy across campus, thinking about that kind of particular advocacy work done by students and faculty, and thinking about really trying to focus on collecting the activities and the stories of cultural affinity organizations across campus, United Asian Coalition, the Black Student Coalition, or even some of the extracurricular programs that have been more inclusive in their programming, like the Outing Club, which has been around for close to 100 years now. Like, just making those really concrete changes in terms of like what a body of records look like that represent a campus is a really kind of concrete example of showing what DEI work can kind of look like, and that it's not inherently exclusionary. It is meant to encompass everyone.
Thank you, Kai. We know what the civil rights movement did for this diversity, equity, and inclusion at a time. Are there any movements that we're seeing? We know Black Lives Matter, but with this combating this, are there any new ways of thinking that are coming out that for people to rally around to bring this back to the forefront? Or does it take like one person like an Malcolm X or a Dr. King to kind of rally the troops in understanding and moving forward?
I think it's
in other words, is it collective or is it singular? Are we all looking for the hero to come and save us, or, you know, what do we do?
I think it's collective. I think we need to take the lesson we did learn from the civil rights movement of that collective power, right? Yes, there were individualized groups with different philosophies, but the outcome was still the same of what we were looking for. But when folks came together across groups, across dynamics, that voice was powerful and you had to be heard. You felt better walking down in a protest arm in arm with brother, sister, whomever, fighting for the same cause than you do walking individually. So will there always be an individual hero? Maybe. There might be a few of those individual heroes. But when all of us come together and join our collective power, our voice is louder and it means more.
I would add to that and say that, this might seem really simple. I think that there is so much negativity with social media. There's so much misinformation, and people, like Tanisha said, grab onto that and go with it. I was cautious about even mentioning the person that I referenced because, social media, but there's also a positive side to it too. And I think we saw that recently with Kendrick Lamar's performance at the Super Bowl. That's why I say it seems simple, but that one performance, everyone had such an extreme reaction to it, and you were on one side or the other. But give social media a little time, and all of a sudden the people that were, I hate it, are like, whoa, did you hear all this messaging? And wow, it was really cool. It was like all this secret stuff was going on, and now they're investigating it, and they're talking to their friends. I was at trivia last night, and my friends were all talking about it. And so there's that positive aspect too that maybe we can lean on a little bit, where it doesn't have to be super structured movement where everyone's got their role, and it's just, let's pump out the correct information, the positive information to combat all of the crappy stuff that exists.
Thank you, Blair. And on that note, thank you for bringing up Kendrick Lamar. I just want to say, we just have a few more minutes. I can't believe it's just a few more minutes before we close. What would the world look like if these dynamics would change? What would you imagine or want to see the world looking like? I want to close on this positive note that we can move forward in some dynamic way. And you only have a couple minutes.
Mine is accessibility for all. The help and barriers being decreased just for resources and other things we need. I hate to call it out like for the classism piece, but we need to start working on those. We need to start making things more obtainable, and that's part of this is what DEI was fighting for. So accessibility for me would be huge, and not to be seen as just a Black woman or just that, or in with the limits that I may have, or you may think I may have, or you think I should have, seen as you would look at everyone else. So not colorblind, but seen as the strong Black woman without the stereotypes.
Thank you, Tanisha. Anyone else want to share what they envision? Casey?
Yeah, I think the material well-being and maybe we can call that like equity or, a sustainable livelihood for everyone. And I think sometimes people have the perception that they are unstable, that they don't have the resources they need to thrive when there's a failure to make a comparative kind of, outlook on the world. I mean, arguably we had election outcomes based on people's perceptions that the price of eggs were too high when actually like material wherewithal is okay. So I really wish in the future we could inhabit a culture where people, are sustained materially, but free from fear, free from a fearsomeness that is perpetuated in kind of this um, hyper quick media environment. I wish there was a slowing. I wish there was a, um, a pace to it, a meditative quality, and a freedom from fear that can actually allow us to meet people eye to eye, face to face, and take a deep breath in and look around to see where we are to move forward together.
I'll just hop in really quickly with my closing thought, and then I'll get off my soapbox as an archivist and historian, but just to be reflective about the past, to really concretely take the lessons that we've learned, as folks have suggested, from the civil rights era, from grassroots movements from across campus here at UNH, and also just the constellation of activities by tireless advocacy workers across New Hampshire in the United States, and understanding that work and the work that they do is the basis on which, it's the shoulders that you stand on where you can continue that work as well, and to be reflective of the past and the opportunities that can present themselves in the future.
Thank you so much, Kai. Well, I think we're out of time. And I really appreciate everybody joining us for this conversation. What I really take away from this is that we have a personal responsibility to create the environment and the world that we want to live in. And if we were all, as individuals, taking that responsibility to be accountable to the collective, we have a chance to create the communities that we want. So I hope we can walk away with some insights gained from our panelists on, what the work that needs to be done, our own internal work that needs to be done, just to stick with that a bit. And the UNH is doing some really good work in bringing these these conversations to the forefront, and I hope the alumni and community will continue to join us in the future to engage in these conversations. Change only happens when we come together and have conversations where we engage with each other. So thank you all, and I do appreciate you all being here. Thank you. Are we done?